Welcome to Freddie's Huge Ask Podcast. Huge lives and the stories behind them.
3, 2, 1.
And now here's your host, Freddie Cruz.
Tova Friedman is one of the youngest survivors of the Holocaust, and she details her journey of pain, suffering, survival, and hope in her new memoir, The Daughter of Auschwitz. And Tova joins me right now.
Hi.
Hi there. Thank you so much for coming by the podcast. I want to begin with, because you're on the record as saying that you don't have survivor's guilt, which I imagine would be quite easy.
Well, it depends on the definition of it. Guilt is always very, it is very negative, and it gives you a negative outlook on life. That's what guilt does. It stops you from all kinds of functioning and gives you inner anxiety. No, What I have is survivor's growth, and it's or survivor's responsibility. My experience had propelled me to behave in a certain way, choose a certain profession. So it's always with me, but I think I try to make it as a positive thing, which is exactly what Hitler didn't want to. If I give in to guilt and I'm unhappy, then he's won. So
Right.
I don't allow that.
At what point after your return home and then your move to America did you arrive at this decision to frame it this way?
When I was 12, I arrived to America. And as a refugee, you have to be checked by doctors when you arrive and making sure that you're healthy and so forth. And one of the doctors, very kind person, saw my number, my tattoo, and he said to me, "Oh, I want to give you a gift. I'm going to take it off. It's going to be a very small operation, and in a year or two, it'll be a tiny scar. You won't even see it." And I looked at him and I said, if this tattoo would be on my forehead and the world would see it, I would not take it off. I said, I did nothing wrong and I want the world to know. So I realized that I was okay with it, although I never spoke about it because nobody asked.
And there were even people who took the doctors up on that offer, like, yes, please remove the tattoo.
I don't blame them at all. I mean, to
Right.
me, looking at my tattoo, it makes me remember every single day of my life. And I don't blame people who don't want to remember. So I know people who took it off. That's a choice. It's the way to look at life.
I want to go back to something that you mentioned, Tova, and that is with regards to not being asked much about your number. And can you talk about maybe the first couple of times or the first time that somebody asked you about
my
it?
children. So I had to wait until I had married, had 4 children. I think my oldest child, we were living in Israel at the time. She must have been 14, 15. And she said, even in Israel, they didn't talk much about it. It was sort of a hidden chapter of the Jewish history that people weren't ready to hear about it yet. And she said, we're talking about something like the war in Europe. She said, my children knew about it. Would you share it? And that's the first time I shared it. So I was quite an adult by then. I started sharing it when I was 40 or 50 years old. Till then, very little. Very little.
That's
Except my own family.
that's quite sad to know that.
Well,
nobody
when I
asked
first
you
came to
about it.
America, I was in 8th grade. My teacher said, cover up that arm. We don't want to see the terrible things, atrocities. Cut your hair. I had long braids. I look very European. And change your name. That's what she said. And I tried to do that. She was only kind. It was not done with bad will. It was done with kindness. And then she said, maybe you should forget as soon as possible. We didn't talk about it. Therapy didn't exist. None of these things. And nobody, you just, you're done with it. Now you're in America, a new life. Cut the old light off. Just cut it. Forget about it.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. I wonder how much of that. I wonder how much of that is okay. Well, the Americans went to Germany and we beat the Nazis. The Jews are freed, and now you're here in America. So let's move on. I wonder how much of that was played into that kind of mindset back then.
Yeah. Yep. The world wanted to move on. Everybody wanted to move on, and not to deal with all those incomprehensible. It was incomprehensible. It still is, by the way. The
Right.
book does not really describe what really happened because you can't. Words are insufficient. So that was
Yeah.
my first experience with telling the story.
Yeah, and going back to something that you wrote about, and that's 23% of Americans polled believe that the Holocaust was over exaggerated or that it's some sort of
Absolutely.
myth. And I wonder, I've got to ask how much of that, because that is actually problematic, and it really angers me because 23% of Americans polled, it's like, wow. So I wonder how much of this statistic impacted your decision to tell these very hard truths. And I grew up in the American education system, so I know about, the Americans. We went and we freed the Jews, and we were attacked by the Japanese, and we showed them, and that
Right.
was it. We didn't
Exactly.
learn about any of the
Exactly.
post-war after effects. Like, hey, it's not as easy as families going back home from the camps, and all of a sudden they've got their homes and their livelihoods, and they wake up and they go to work, and the kids go to school and they learn, and everything is just swell. It's not like that. So that's something that I didn't learn. But how much of this impacted your decision to tell these hard truths with graphic detail that I think personally more of us should see and read about?
Well, it wasn't a campaign. I just did it for me. In other
Hmm.
words, when anybody denied it, and I met deniers, I ignored them. I didn't argue with them
Hmm.
because I felt you can't argue with people like that who say it didn't happen or it wasn't as terrible and so forth. I just was quiet. I really, I think maybe that's why it makes me mentally healthy. It wasn't a war against anybody to try and fight it. It was like, listen, I am doing it so I can remember those that are. I'm a representative. I'm a witness. And if you want to hear about what I witnessed, I'll tell you. If you don't want to hear it, that's okay. I won't tell you. I never forgot that. I spoke at a college in Manhattan, and the teacher was from India. It was a history class. Somebody invited me. And after my talk, she said to the class, you know, all of this doesn't really impact us. This happened across the ocean long time ago, far away. It doesn't have much to do with us. And I said to her, well, thank you. I don't think she invited me. Somebody in the class invited me. I said, okay, that's how you interpret things. People have a right to this kind of interpretation. But I am here. That's why I have my number. That's why I'm happy I never took it off. So that I am here to uh, to tell the truth. You see, Hitler wanted no witnesses. No witnesses. His 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 campaign and his motto was to kill every single person, Jewish, all the or non-Jews too, like the Gypsies, the Roma, because they would go, okay, leave no witnesses. Children have to be killed first because they'll grow up and be witnesses. So my being here is a defiance of Hitler. And I am there to talk to anybody who wants to listen.
And I want to go back to something else that, there's just there's so much history behind the Second World War that it's impossible to know every single aspect of every single
No,
account.
I'm still learning.
And and I feel like I've learned just through your memoir. I feel like I've learned more about the Jewish experience through these 286 pages than I ever learned in middle school, high school, and in college. So I've got to know, because one of the things that I didn't really learn about was like the Nuremberg argument of just following orders. And it wasn't until a few years back that I learned of that, like after school, learned of, oh, the Nuremberg argument. Oh, we're just doing what we're told. It's following orders. Oh yeah, and no big deal. Like I was asked to do it, so I did it. And it's okay now, right? We're good, right? Well, no, not really. So I want to go to the clear line, which I agree with on numerous levels. The clear line that you drew and that continue to draw between just following orders after the war. So what can people in positions of power and influence learn from this?
Well, because that you do have a choice. You're human. The best gift that, if you believe in God or higher power, were given was a choice. We can become angels or we can become devils. It's in all of us, all of us. And that choice, and those people who say I followed orders, chose to follow evil. It was their choice. Now, it's true that they could have been killed if they didn't follow orders and so forth, but that's only one person. Just imagine if 100,000 of them would not follow the orders, or they would organize not to follow the orders. They would say, we're not going to burn people. We're not going to whatever. That would have been a completely different situation. Do you know, during Kristallnacht, are you familiar with Kristallnacht?
Night of Broken Glass?
What? No, you're not.
Was that the night of Broken Glass?
Yes, exactly. Exactly. That's when Hitler got all his gangs, who I call them hoodlums, those gangs with clubs and guns to break all windows, all stores, and all synagogues. Well, this was a sign. People were killed, but inadvertently. They weren't there to shoot the people. They were there to destroy our house of worship. If people had gotten together and said, no, you're not going any further, you can't do that, there was a pivotal point that it didn't have to go any further, but it did. It kept on going and going and going until the burning and the gassing.
And to your point, if you have 10,000 or even 20,000, 100,000 Germans who are like, yeah, no,
Absolutely.
we're not gonna do this. It's like, okay, well, what are Himmler and Hitler gonna do? Are they gonna arrest them all? And if you have enough uprising there, because
Absolutely.
the power
Well,
is so concentrated to so few, that power dynamic starts to really shift the other way.
yeah, yes. Here, somebody did try to assassinate, but they were individuals, small groups, 5, 10 people. We needed a power of the churches weren't helpful. The churches were quiet. The Catholicism was quiet. So they needed leaders to tell the people, stop. We are not following a maniac like that. Instead, he was so charismatic. I mean, have you watched the way the groups would raise their salute to him? Millions of Germans, children, older people, intellectual professors, all were doing this salute to him because he was, I guess, a good speaker. So
Yeah,
it
and that's
doesn't make
yeah, that's
sense.
what
The whole thing is like, it's like a nightmare.
yeah, it blows my mind. And something else you speak about is that there were intelligent, as you said, there were intelligent people within the apparatus because you had to
Oh,
have
only
this
intelligent people.
efficient machine. Yeah, had to have this efficient machine to do these horrific things.
It was a very sophisticated machine of murder. It had to be done by very smart people. Even the gas that were it was, I guess, invented or perfected by scientists. So first, cyclone B. First, it took 20 minutes to kill 500 people in a room, to suffocate them. And they perfected it to 10 minutes. They worked on it. Scientists worked on it. The simple person couldn't have done it. The whole thing was done by people who were the cream of the society.
Throughout your experience, you and your family and some of your campmates in Auschwitz remained rebellious and hopeful in the face of certain death at times. And one example that really just struck a chord with me was Ritz's story of the matzah. So what kind of advice could you impart for people who have fallen into despair?
It's a very difficult, because when you have reached despair, it's very hard to get out of that. You see, with a matzah, uh, we were still together. I had a family, and the family is what keeps people strong. I had mother, father, and we lived in a place together. So we did not yet reach the despair, because the despair was when they separated us. Everything that I'm a therapist, so everything that I read and know is that people in their despair who could find some hope with another human being survived better than those who were completely alone. Friendships and the hope that you will reunite with your family. It was the hope that kept people from completely falling apart. They have to they have to stay alive, because somewhere they will meet their child again, or their mother or father again, or their brother and sister. That's what kept most people alive, is the hope that they will get reunited with people they loved, husband, wives.
Can we talk about the first time you were able to experience joy at a simple thing, just something small and tiny that in 2022 we would probably take for granted, that just made you happy and lit you up?
I mean, when I wasn't hungry anymore. When the
Mm.
Russians came, the good thing, they set up a kitchen, a makeshift kitchen, because they had it for their army, for their own soldiers. And I remember the first time I smelled bread. I didn't know what it was. I smelled the baking of bread, because they had made these gigantic loaves for their own soldiers. And we were online. We all lined up, I, my mother, and I smelled that smell. And I said, "What is that?" She said, "It's bread." I mean, I had bread in Auschwitz, but it was, a tiny piece of lump of nothing. Certainly didn't have a smell or consistency of anything.
Mm.
And I remember I ate it, and I was just like overwhelmed. And I had some, and my mother said you could only have one piece because otherwise your stomach will hurt. And that was my first real, real feeling of joy that I wasn't hungry and I had something absolutely delicious. This discovery of that piece. It's sort of funny to think about that now.
Well, and it really impacted you that moment.
I went back. Now, my mother took the bread away from me because she was afraid I would eat all of it and I'd get very sick, like a lot of people got very sick. But I was so unhappy not to have it that I went online again. You were supposed to go online only once. And I was afraid the guy would recognize me. Of course, he wouldn't recognize me. There were hundreds of people online. And I got a second piece of a second loaf. And I read to my mother and I said, see. He says, where'd you get that? You weren't supposed to go twice. I said, no, somebody just gave it to me. it's it's the first taste of bread, which was fabulous.
The Yiskor, did I pronounce it right? Yiskor, or is it
Yisker,
Yiskor?
yeah.
Yis,
What is
the
that?
Yisker book is something that you reference quite often. Your dad's book,
Yeah,
but
well,
it's
I'll tell
something
you
within
what
the
it
community
is.
that you all write.
You see, from my town, there were 15,000 Jews. At the end of the war, there were only 300. So they had to somehow commemorate or remember those dead people. I mean, my mother's entire family, my father's, everybody knew each other. They were there for hundreds of years in their town. So Yiska means to remember. So that's a book of remembrance. And each family member, like my father, my mother, I don't know, no, my mother wasn't, she didn't, I don't remember if she did it. It would describe their family that was lost. Some had pictures before the war, and memoirs. People began to write. It was in 1946 or 47, very early after the war, what they remembered, so they can be uh, part of the history of the town. So that's where my father's article came from.
And you mentioned a lot. You mentioned his particular book quite often
Yeah,
in
I mentioned
the memoir.
his article, which is very he wrote it in Yiddish, and somebody translated it on the internet. I don't know who did it. People are beginning to translate a lot of these books into English so that more people can read them. And I found the article on the internet. So I made many copies.
Can you go back to maybe the first time you read it as an adult, your father's Yiskor
Oh
book?
my God, it was so. Yeah, no, the first time my father read it to me in Yiddish, and he died not knowing that it was translated. It was translated many years later, maybe 10 years ago. He died in 1980. So he read it to me in Yiddish. I couldn't read it so well. It was difficult Yiddish for me. So we read it together, and he was crying throughout the whole reading.
Can we talk about your decision to become a therapist? What influenced you after all these years, after your experience, and what led
Well,
you to that?
I always was looking for a way to leave the place, to leave a mark, to make it a little bit better. I, my whole psychology is to undo what Hitler did. But I'm one person. How can you undo it? So I undid it by having children, and they all are very versed in Judaism. They all know. We lived 10 years in Israel to make it to solidify our Judaism, because that's exactly what he wanted to destroy. And then he just wanted to destroy our psyche, everything. So I decided that I will work with the elderly first, I started working with the elderly because that's the population that he targeted immediately. Immediately, the beginning of the war. All elderly were killed, all children were killed, and he left only those that are able bodied, strong people. They could work. He only left people alive, those who could help him with the war. The rest were just ashes.
Yeah, that really struck a chord with me because I'm only a few years away from turning 50 and learning that once you turn 50,
Oh,
according
absolutely.
to the
You would make
Nazis,
it.
that's it.
You would be an
You're
old man.
yeah, yeah,
But no,
and
but what would save you is you don't have gray hair. So that
you don't see gray hair right now, but I see a lot of it in the mirror.
I don't see
But
it.
thank you. No, but no, and it was just it was shocking and heartbreaking to learn that you didn't see anybody with white hair until you came to America.
Until I was much older, yeah.
What was something else that you didn't, that when you came to America that you saw that, wow, this actually exists?
Well, what I was shocked is when the kids in my class would tell me that they took piano lessons and it's hard for them and they've been doing it since they're 4 years old and their parents and they don't really like it, or ballet classes. And I said to myself, how is that possible? When I was in Auschwitz, they were playing piano. I had trouble understanding as a child. Now I understand it, right? Because I live in a pretty safe, comfortable place, and there are people somewhere in the world starving. I understand there's so many different worlds, unfortunately. But at that time, as a young girl, I didn't understand that there were different worlds. How could she be playing piano when I was starving to death? I incongruous. I had to put it together. And as it grew, of course, that's reality. That's what happens on this earth. During
Yeah.
COVID, when people complained and they said, "Oh, things are happening, so forth and so on," I said, "Yeah, you're suffering." Mostly to my friends, I'd say, "You're sitting in your living room, you're having a glass of wine." You're by yourself, but you have a glass of wine. Your children left a whole package outside of food for you. It's really tough, you know. So it's sort of interesting how not that I was also isolated. My husband died 2 years ago. He died the first week of COVID, not from COVID. So I found myself alone for the first time in 60 years. We were married 60 years. But, I kept saying, I have a warm bed. I have television. I've got all the books I want. I've got all the food I want. I speak with my friends on the telephone. I do FaceTime. What's wrong? Do you know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean. It's all perspective and all in
Exactly.
how you frame the way you want
Exactly.
to
Exactly.
react to the
Yeah.
circumstances which befall you.
I
Yeah.
mean, I worked all through COVID
Yeah.
because we do it on the telephone, right? We have special health lines. So some of my clients were very, very scared, very upset. So I was there for them.
Any parting words for those who wish to learn more about your work?
Well, I have a website. I got to remember it. Tova Friedman, survivor.com. My son made it easy so I could remember it. I can't
We love it when sons make it easy for mom.
make it easy. My kids have been wonderful. Everything has to be made easy for mom. This is
That's
like
what it's all about. Happy mom, happy mom, happy life. Happy wife, happy mom, happy grandma, happy sister. Yes.
absolutely because life is so complicated now. Thank
But
you.
going back to you and your book, I mean every word of it. I learned more about the Jewish experience in World War II and even after than I ever learned in all my years in school.
I
And
appreciate it very much.
well,
Really.
and I appreciate you sharing this story. And for those listening, these are hard truths, and she leaves nothing on the table. But you need to read this book. You need to read this book, and you need to see every picture. And it doesn't matter how much you know or think you know, or how much you don't know or think you don't know. This is going to be the most important book. And, you know, I will tell you just one more thing, Tova. By the end of the book, I had this thought that it reminded me of the first time I read Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn's The Gulag Archipelago. And I hope that you do for humanity remembering the Holocaust what Solzhenitsyn did for those who suffered under Stalin and
Wow.
the Soviet Union.
Thank you so much.
I really, really hope that happens. So if you're listening, buy the book and buy copies for everybody, because it's really necessary. And we just want to sell books. But no, it's
You're very kind, and you really are doing for me. You know, you're doing for me what I had hoped you would do. You're helping to spread information. Thank you.
Thank you, Tova. So Tova Friedman, and that's Friedman, Tova Friedman, survivor.com. And a special shout out to her son. What's your son's name?
Oh, it's my son who did it, Shani.
Shani, and a shout out to Shani for making it easy for all of us. Go to Tova Friedman.
Something else.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
I wonder if you have time. My grandson,
I do.
Aaron Goodman, put me on TikTok.
Oh, all right.
Oh, do you ever watch TikTok? Do you do TikTok?
I unfortunately watch TikTok, but now no longer unfortunately, now that I know you're on it, so I can get some useful content.
Oh, you can. And just my name, Tova Friedman. He did a great job, and he million people are watching and asking questions, and they're mostly young people.
Outstanding.
So
because we got to get this 23% of people who think that the Holocaust is over exaggerated and think it's a myth. We got to get that number down to zero.
Yes, and they watch TikTok. They do TikTok. Those people, they're the young, uneducated who are now becoming very educated and interested. So everybody's doing their part before I'm not here anymore. So I want to thank you.
All right. That's very nice of Aaron to set her up on TikTok. Look her up there, Tova Friedman. And the website is tovafriedmansurvivor.com, where you can learn all about Tova's story. And then you pick up the memoir. And I'll say it again, it's going to be the most important book you read all year, decade, century. So
thank you.
Tova, it's an honor. Thank you so much for joining my podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Freddie's Huge Ask podcast.